So here we are, the last Friday of September 2020. We started this in late spring, and now it's the beginning of fall.
Wow.
So when are we going to run out of things to talk about?
Never. Even if we say the same thing every time, it's different because we've grown and we have 7 days of experience behind us.
And those are not linear days.
No.
I mean, they are on the calendar, but they're not in the soul.
Right.
So what do you want to talk about today?
Something profoundly unprofound.
Okay. Can I tell you a story?
Sure.
So a week ago today, I got delivered to me a copy of J.K. Rowling's new novel called Troubled Blood. 925 pages later, I finished it yesterday, and I was incredibly moved by the way she captures dysfunctional family history playing out among adults. And her two main characters come from two completely different dysfunctional families. And she does such a great job of chronicling the interior dialogue of the reticular activating system. Each one of these two characters, a man and a woman, is captive of each of their reticular activating systems. And so they don't see their relationship with each other is based entirely on their internal projections.
Yeah.
And Rowling does such a great job of demonstrating the practical impact that this has. Now, she's not writing this book to give an accountability practice introduction by any means, but I just kept being in awe of the way she captures the internal dialogue of a dysfunctional person without blame or judgment. It's just it's the way the people are, and how over the course of 900 pages, it's a murder mystery, but it's really this character study of not only the two main characters but all the people in their lives. And I thought, what a great conversation it could be among those of us who have read this book to talk about this way these dysfunctional families generated these specific histories for these people, and the way their reticular activating systems keep them captive. And it's particularly ironic because they're detectives, and so they're able to see things in the case that they're working on. They're able to step outside of some of their assumptions in order to see patterns that no one else had seen before. So that they're actually trained to do this professionally. Mm-hmm. But as we know in our work, that our inability to do that for ourselves is where the action is.
Yeah.
So I had a great time reading this book and tracking these characters stumbling towards some kind of relationship with it, because they're both very attracted to each other, and they're full of, well, if I tell him, he'll freak out and run away.
Yeah.
Or if I tell her, she'll freak out and run away. It's like, and that's both it's what they both want. Mm-hmm. Oh, John, life.
Yes. Yeah. So
then, in talking to one of our comrades, he told me about a book that someone recommended to him called The Spirituality of Imperfection. Which I guess is written by some couple of folks who've been through AA, and it's, I guess, part of the AA literature. And it struck me about how much of our internal dialogue and my internal dialogue is based on an assumption that things should be a certain way, and that much of what I do in my life is measure the distance between what is and what should be.
Right.
And have some lamenting or criticism or dissatisfaction with this gap, which is entirely fictional.
Yes.
But it still feels real.
Yes.
And again, that was actually what's going on in this novel that I'm reading. But it's something we could talk about. That where does that come from? Where does this? I call it my perfection template. Somehow, without going to school for this, without reading a book about it, without listening to a YouTube video, I created this list of things, experiences, or conditions that I'm supposed to have in order to be living the appropriate life.
Yeah.
And
be happy.
of course, it never happens. So, so maybe part of the perfection is the capacity to appreciate suffering by beating myself up for falling short all the time, because that seems perfect.
Yeah. What came to my mind is the talk about the veil and getting on the other side of the veil, and that life is an illusion. You know, the philosophical minds talk about life being an illusion, like Buddha, and I'm not sure he even talked about it that specifically. And the illusion is everything I'm projecting out is me instead of what I see, and I'm assigning it to them or that, and then trying to fix it, trying to control it, trying to maneuver it, trying to understand it, and I get stuck in this downward spiral of dysfunctional behaviors that I can't see. People are sometimes gracious enough to point it out to me, and then I'll take that as one of the traits of adult children of alcoholics is perceiving criticism as a threat, and then respond as if I'm being threatened instead of seen.
But even so, that assumption of the way things are supposed to be comes from somewhere. I can't help but think it's somehow related to the defense mechanisms that we generate to survive the difficulties of childhood.
It's our projection, how we project. We project our internal on everybody else and actually think of them when it's us projecting out.
And somehow we receive messages. So I'm going to, again, iMessage. I got messages from my parents about the way things are supposed to be. And regardless of what they actually said, I heard it through my filters. And I think that's part of how this perfection template got built over time. Because now I can test for rewards and punishments.
Yeah.
I can apply my behavior in my family, and I can see what brings approval, and I can see what brings punishment or some kind of criticism. Then over time, that just becomes a system.
Right. And it's built into our language. Violence and coercion, the end result of trauma, gets built into the language and then perpetuates itself through the language we use with each other. And I want to break that down coming from the groups I did in jails and prisons about conflict resolution and violence intervention. I talk about changing the language that we use. And the language that we've been trained in is violent or coercive to self and others. And what I mean by that, emotional violence in the form of dismissing somebody, ignoring somebody, or redefining their reality. Verbal violence or coercion in the form of threatening, raising my voice, or posturing in a way. Objectifying, calling somebody names, and diminishing them with tone, inflection, or making them less than what they are. And then, of course, the physical violence, which is classified in the group I taught as two distinct things. One is hands-on physical violence, touching, hitting, and the other one is physical violence around somebody, like throwing something in the room, hitting the wall, driving fast, stopping fast, with the intent of watch out, you're next. So that's become our style of communication built into the language. And when somebody offers insight into that, it seems unreasonable because everybody's doing it. It's like, what do you mean? It's not violent. It's just whatever. It's like we use terms like, well, that person's rude or that person's insensitive, and we can't get past the language barrier itself to be authentic, or even know that we have a problem with authenticity.
So when you, and what you just said, what would we understand by authenticity? Because aren't I authentically enraged and violent?
Um, I could be if you're in a destructive mode. It's coming from trauma or wounding. If it's in um, an expression that connects me to me, and then creates the possibility of me connecting to you, then I would say it's anger or rage. And what we classify as rage is usually the behavior from some kind of resentment, bitterness, contempt, or filtered through the trauma or dysfunctional family of origin dysfunction, filtered through that, and we tag it with an emotional word, and it's not the emotion, it's the end result of whatever the emotion might have been. It's like when I speak to a group of men, I make the statement that anger is the least felt emotion by men on this planet. And yet it's the word we use mostly to describe men's behavior that is aggressive or arrogant. And if we tell the truth about what's happening, which is violent behavior coming from a sense of injustice, with that feeling, that sensing of an injustice is the emotional part, and then moving towards resolution without hurting yourself or other people. One of my pet peeves: men are angry and women shouldn't be angry. They don't have the right to be angry. And what's actually happened is men are violent, and we don't want women to be violent. They're supposed to be submissive. So we use a word that speaks to our emotional body, which is pre-action, before the action happens, and we describe the behavior and attach it to an emotion, which I want to offer is what I'm talking about, the language. It's built into the language. If I said, that behavior was violent and coercive, coming from a resentment, bitterness, and contempt that was built into me through unresolved trauma, I have a way out. If I constantly say I'm angry, then I'm pretty well screwed. Anger is a spontaneous thing that happens to me. And so I don't take ownership of the behavior. Any emotion attaches me first to me and then to somebody else, including the feeling emotion of anger. The definition I use for anger is a sense of injustice or a sense of hurt or harm happening in the moment. If I sense hurt or harm or injustice and I move to resolution, then that behavior could be violent, or it could be affirming, or it could be, what's the word I'm looking for, assertive, and it has nothing to do with anger. The violence that I found myself doing in my communication style came out of whatever feeling I was in a sense that somebody was messing with me. I could have felt content and then been violent, dismissive, or ignoring somebody, or redefining their don't bother me, then that had nothing to do with anger. It could be from a feeling of hurt that I didn't know how to process, and instead of processing, I projected it out onto the people around me, and blamed them for, and actually took an action which was violent towards them and called it anger. So I'm going to stop. I'll see if you have any thoughts or clarification points or insight.
Well, I think it's a very sophisticated point, and I'm thinking about somebody who might be listening in for the first time.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can say it the way I heard it. So I'm willing to make a mistake here.
Okay.
I'm willing to look foolish. I'm willing to get it wrong. So there is an authentic and genuine emotion called anger, to which all human beings have access.
Yeah.
And anger, that authentic feeling energy, is usually the result of a perceived injustice happening. It's a response to the threat of hurt or something that feels harmful. Correct? Do I have that correct so far?
Well, it's not the response, it's the sense that it happened. That's the emotion. This is happening. That's our emotional body is offering us information that there's an injustice occurring.
Right. So it's my body's responding to this perceived injustice.
Right.
And generating this aggravation or sense of needing to do something, needing to move, to react, to fend off, whatever.
That's the choice from the emotion.
So that's two parts. The first is the feeling, the second is the behavior in response to the feeling.
Right. So the feeling is, I have a sense that you're stepping on my toe. You're stepping on my toe. The response is a choice. I could knock you out, or I could say, Marty, you're stepping on my toe. From the feeling of injustice or hurt, we call the knocking you out or request of you moving off my toe, either we call that anger. It's not anger, it's the response to the awareness that something is happening.
So let me tell a story, and then let's see if of my own experience with anger. This happened about 20 years ago. I had a very responsible position in state government, and we were implementing a controversial new environmental program.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many, many, many stakeholders involved in this, all across the state, actually across the country, because it was a mandate from the national government. And I had a team inside of my agency of about 20 people. We met every Friday morning just to go through what's going on, to check in all the moving parts. And sometimes things got really tense. Part of it was because of the disparate responsibilities that different people around the table had. Not everybody was aware of how everybody else was, the pressures that every different parts of the team were under. And so I just remember this particular time, something happened and people were bickering, or there was lack of understanding, and I could feel the tension rising, and then something inside of me just snapped, feeling, and it felt like anger. And I stood up, I was sitting at the head of the table, and I slammed my hand down on the table and I said, I am really angry right now. It's got nothing to do with anybody in this room, but I have to let this feeling go through me before we continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I just stood there and I shook, and I just let it go and took a few deep breaths and then sat back down.
Mm-hmm. So your choice to stand up and slam the table was actually that a choice from the emotion, feeling of
Right.
anger. Yeah. If
And it felt so overwhelming that I had to do something. I didn't know how to just sit there and let it flow.
Well, I want to offer that the emotional prompts of behavior, it's the being proactive. It's moving from reactive to proactive. The feeling emotion is pre-behavior.
Right. And I could tell that clearly.
Yeah. So your choice to stand up and bang the table was the behavior from the sensing of anger.
Right.
If you call standing up and banging the table the anger, that's where I have issue with it.
Right. And I'm just telling you, I was pretty clear. The anger was first.
Yes.
And the anger was an overwhelming violence in my body. It felt like my body was being in a tornado.
Okay. So,
And again, we're groping for language here. So,
well, that led me to explain the difference between anger and fight, flight, freeze.
Fight, fright, freeze, please.
Yeah, fight, flight, freeze, please. The survival response mimics emotion. Your hands are sweaty, your heart beats faster. You have sensations in your chest or your legs or your face.
Tension is building.
Well, no, the adrenaline puts you in a survival mode. So you in a survival mode mimics the emotions. This is why when I offer to men to embrace their anger, a lot of the responses was, you don't want to see me angry, because they had equated their behavior, their violent behavior,
right,
hitting, shooting, to the word that described the emotion, not the choice from the emotion. If you delineate the behavior as violent, you get to delineate your behavior any way you want, and separate it from the emotion, then it becomes your choice from your emotional body. If that choice is not present and somebody says, I was angry, so I hit them, that closes the gap, and there's no way out. There's no relief. If I say I experienced anger and my choice was to knock that guy out, then he understands that he made a choice, and the next time he feels that anger, sense of injustice, he can choose to do something different based on his situation with the court system, which might be a good idea for this guy. But if he says, I'm angry and I hit that guy as one thing, he's pretty well screwed. And I'm talking about men who have two strikes. The third strike means they go to jail for 25 years, no matter what the infraction. And this mix up between the emotion of anger, feeling the sense of injustice, and then the choice of how to resolve it is made the same, they're pretty well screwed. Because what choice do they have? Is if I'm a real man and you disrespect me, and I don't knock you out, then I'm going to be weak and seen as that comes from a traumatized individual. Let me offer a sense of what I'm talking about. Mahatma Gandhi said that if you look around at the condition of the planet today and you are not enraged, there's something wrong. So Mahatma Gandhi was the nonviolent guru. He felt rage, and his choice was nonviolence. So in our language in the United States, because that's what I know, we use a language that uses the behavior, the end result of the choice from the emotion as the emotion itself. That's very dangerous. And it speaks to where we find ourselves in this society with suicide rate, violence going up, and that's debatable whether it's going up or down, and 2.2 million men incarcerated throughout the United States. I was talking to a gentleman at Folsom Prison, and we were the same subject. And he told me a story about his anger inside the prison. If he plays basketball and he loses, somebody gets hurt. He either hurts himself or hurts one of the guys on the opposing team. And I was talking to him about feeling, emotion, then choice of behavior. And so he asked me, he said, I don't understand what you're saying. I said, okay, if you lose at basketball, would it be reasonable to say you're disappointed? He would go, yeah. I said, simply feel disappointed. It's not going to kill you. Instead of the inability to feel disappointed in his experience was he used violence to, that was all he knew. Instead of expressing the feeling, he called it, I'm an angry man.
So does this not bring us back around to what we started talking about, belief systems?
Yes.
That if my belief system says I cannot lose, that if I lose, then I put myself into an existential threat situation.
Yep.
Then if I understood what you said a few minutes ago, when that guy lost, he was in a fight, flight, freeze world.
Right.
And he had to fight.
Yes.
Fight was his default response.
And in prison, that's the only acceptable response, because if you leave, then you're classified as weak and you're going to get attacked. If you freeze, you'll be seen as a mark. So their number one choice, even though it's subconscious and instantaneous, is to fight, so
Right.
that they preserve their image, which isn't who they are. They've got their behavior. This is where I'm talking about behavior mixed up with the emotion. They're defining the behavior by defining it as an emotion instead of a behavior that comes from this belief system that is misinformed.
But it seems to me that again, I'm thinking about the first timer here, or the beginner,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking. So it just jumped in my mind is, okay, what's the practical application of this? And
Okay.
I'm thinking about the possibility of accessing those underlying fundamental unpleasant emotions that anger often masks.
You mean violent mass?
Say that again?
Are you speaking about the behavior, the violent behavior, or the feeling of injustice?
I'm
Different.
talking
Go
I'm
ahead.
talking about the feeling. So I'm thinking about the the classic example we often use is somebody cuts me off in traffic and I get pissed off at the person, which masks my fear that I could have gotten killed.
Yes.
So I'm talking about that substitution
Yes.
process.
Good example. Instead of saying, "Wow, that was scary," taking a breath, they go, "That son of a bitch!" And then they speed up or slow down or do whatever
Right.
maneuver, and somebody gets hurt or they put themselves in a risky place.
Or like in the Folsom Prison basketball example, rather than feeling disappointment, I'm going to feel anger.
Okay. This speaking to the person who's hearing this for the first time. I want to offer that my difficulty talking to you, who is somebody who is seasoned in accountability around this subject, I'm okay with people first hearing this, simply hearing it, and then maybe getting curious about this and looking someplace or asking questions or writing a comment so that they can get more information about it. This is a difficult concept, even for us, Marty.
Yeah, exactly.
So the fact that people are listening to this and wondering what the heck is, I don't know, what is going on here. My hope, I don't like the word hope too much, but my is that they get curious about this and look into it from different angles, or maybe write a comment or call you and go to the Rusty Nail meeting, or give me a call and see if they can talk to me. This is my pet peeve. I've had this awareness, and very rarely do I get into this conversation with people because of the complexity of the dysfunction that we're raised in, and how we're taught to see things and understand things and cognitize, and instead of simply feeling what we're feeling and being in our emotional body. Um,
So
so
let's pull the camera back, because that's a good point. Let's pull the camera back and just talk about that goal that we have in doing this work. The goal for me is to be able to be present with whatever is presencing itself in my body, based on the notion that my body is a highly sophisticated emotional tuning fork, and there's always some emotional current present in my body. And those emotions can be pleasant, they can be unpleasant, they can be mild, they can be intense, but there's always something going on. And that growing up in a dysfunctional family, I had to learn to repress certain feelings because they were so intense, so excruciating, so difficult to manage, that I had to find some way to numb them, disregard them, diminish them, not knowing that I couldn't just actually diminish or suppress one emotion, that would have an impact on all of my emotional states. And that for me, as for many of us, I learned very quickly, probably by the time I was 7, maybe even earlier, that I could deflect feeling into thought. And that thought, I learned to think about things rather than feel them.
Yes.
And so what we're doing in this work is learning to almost reverse engineer that process.
Yeah.
And to help me learn to be present with whatever's going on, particularly when it's acute, particularly when it's reminding me of something I didn't want to feel. And it might be reminding me that subconsciously in such a way I'm not aware of it. So that by being present with what's going on in my moment, in my life, in this moment, that now I have choice. And when I have choice, I can live intentionally. That's one of the words that we use for this process. Or as we say in other programs, I'm now at choice. I'm now authoring what's going on. I'm not just reacting to something I can't see or understand.
Correct.
So that as we parse some of these things the way we've been doing, it's all in service of this fundamental commitment to help each of us just feel what's going on right now without making us wrong if the feeling leads to a thought of censorship or I shouldn't feel that or those old tapes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me, when I asked the three questions I asked, we're in the conversation to find the logistics of these answers. Let me do the questions. Have I ever hurt somebody I loved, regretted it, and then did it again? Have I ever, middle of the argument, got it that I was on the wrong side of the argument and found myself continuing with my argument? Or have I ever been in a situation where I knew what I was about to do I would regret, and even heard a little voice in my head said, don't do that, and found that I couldn't or wouldn't? So this conversation about the difference between an emotion and a behavior is right in the middle of that ferreting out the answer of why I answered yes to all three of those questions. It's a mechanism internal, and the language that we use in this society is enlisted to keep us from knowing that, because then there would be something wrong with us. Then we would be defective. We would, and we go all kinds of places with this. And let me say this: that we have identified ourselves, the who of what we are, with our behavior, and the language affirms that. So that we always try to be better instead of being authentic. Being better is an inauthentic choice. Because if I'm authentic, I'm enough already, and whatever choice I make is going to be in alignment with that authenticity. The simple choice of trying to be better is coming from misinformation. It's inauthentic. So we're in the middle of this conversation trying to figure it out, and I'm glad that we're like bringing it back to some context. The context is, what do I want that's different than what I got? Step one, I'm powerless over whatever the situation is or behavior. And I recognize that I'm in some kind of unmanageability. And then this conversation is clarifying the logistics of the unmanageability, which is built into the language. We use a term that defines emotion to define our behavior, which creates resentment, bitterness, contempt. And I'm going to stop right now.
Well, it reminds me of something we talked about on this podcast a couple of months ago, of the seamless relationship between thoughts and feelings, and that our language is inadequate to help us understand the relationship between a feeling and a thought that seems to be part of that feeling, whether it is or not.
Right.
Because of this belief system. That's what I learned. It's how I defend myself. And now, because the emotions happen first, age 0 to 4, no rational thought yet. It's all emotional. By the time I turn 4 or 5, now language starts to emerge. I start to be able to master that and start having rational thoughts. My rational thoughts are going to be crafted based on that emotional input that's been building up for 3, 4, 5 years. And so now I'm stuck because I can't get outside of that language any more than I can get outside of the feeling. But the illusion, because the human imagination is so powerful, the illusion is that I can think my way around this. I just haven't found the right thought.
Right.
Rather than what we're doing here, it's like, let go of the thought for just a moment and go into the feeling.
Yes.
And I've shared with you and folks on this podcast many times that when I've gone through the accountability process and I've gotten in touch with the authentic, actual emotional vibration going on in my body, even when it's unpleasant, even when it causes me to tear up, causes my heart rate to elevate, whatever. And then when you or the facilitator of the conversation will ask, so what do I want? That body vibration has never failed to answer that question for my mind.
Absolutely.
And that's like a bugger all to everything I believed until I got into this work.
Yeah. It's counterintuitive. It goes against everything you've been taught as what it is, how it works. And it's where the feeling of relief and connection and connection to self, and we talk about doing this in a room, the connection to every person in that room, because every person in that room feels this emotion of relief, and it serves everybody.
Right.
Yes.
So that's why a lot of this, you once upon a time called this work, and maybe you still use this, demystifying behavior.
Yeah.
And we're actually demystifying more than behavior. We're also demystifying thought patterns, belief systems, all the elements of this. What an adult children of alcoholics is called the false personality. Maybe that's a term of art in AA as well. The false personality, the mask that I wear to keep myself safe from all the perceived threats outside of me, which are actually inside of me.
Yeah. And if I could boil down this whole addiction dysfunction field into one reason, it's misidentity, is not knowing who you really are. Identifying with behavior, which we all agree that guy's an angry man because he's throwing shit around, instead of saying that guy's a violent man. This mechanism sees somebody dismissing me as attacking my identity, and it doesn't know the difference between a lie and the truth. If I say I'm a tough guy and somebody makes me look weak, that guy's going to get it, or I'm going to die. And this mechanism pumps adrenaline into your body. It mimics emotion. You do violent behavior, you call it anger, and we just keep locking people up and picking them up off the streets from suicide, and not talking about what's really going on, or even knowing that there is anything else going on.
Much less have the skills to do it without blame or judgment.
Without blame or judgment.
Because that's one thing we haven't really dwelled on. I'd just like to bring that piece in. Because, again, going back to your insight about language, we even talked about this last week, and trying to find a word to use instead of judgment, because judgment has different meanings. And so just learning always to find as crisp a way to express some of these things in words is the challenge / opportunity. So no blame, no judgment here, we mean is I felt that way. There's nothing wrong with feeling that way. And I can't be blamed for it. It's not like I chose it. It's not like I went to Target and picked that emotion instead of another one. And no judgment means no criticism.
Yeah.
No placing somebody out there as an authority who gets to say that I shouldn't have felt that way. Or projected internal authority projected out there. So no blame, no judgment has been essential for me in this work, and it took me a long time to relax into noticing when I'm blaming and judging so that I can choose not to do that. Because it was so instantaneous, like so many of these responses are, that it's almost unfortunately part of the fight, flight, freeze, please automatic response includes a judgment and a blame.
And the judgment keeps us out of our emotional body.
Right.
Just back up into our rational need to understand place where, and I talked about this before, the rational mind processes 4 bits of information per second. The subconscious mind processes 4 million bits of information per second. And we think we're going to rationalize our way out of this. We got another thing coming. So, yeah.
It's sobering to think that the rational mind as a social existent in humanity is really about 500 years old.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of new compared to the emotional limbic system, which has been in mammals for hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I blame Aristotle.
You know, he blamed you, so I don't know.
He's the one, you know, the rational. This whole Western rational supremacy evolution into rational thinking, the way I understand it is, and I was reading, I don't even remember the name of the book, but Aristotle and maybe even Plato got a poem from Epictetus that was like tattered, and he misinterpreted the significance of being intuitive, being in our emotional body, and the way he read it is rational brain trumps the emotional body, and it's not even what the guy wrote. And then they created our whole Western society on being rational, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's exactly right, but okay.
Yeah. Well,
you got to blame Descartes. Descartes is the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am."
Yeah. Okay. I'll blame them both. This has been an age-old problem, and it's like 15, 17, why do I do those things I don't want to do, and know that I know the right thing to do, and find myself always doing the opposite. It's something we've all been struggling with, and what we're saying is misinformation, reticular activating system, subconscious pool of information is the motivating factor for behavior that creates separation. And as a child, that was the correct thing to do to survive. It simply does not work as adults. And being in relearning our emotional body and connecting to our emotional body gives us insight we can't get any other way.
I made the comment about the 500-year-old newness of mass reasoning capacity, because this is we're still learning our way through all this stuff. It's like an analogy that you could draw is it's like a kid who gets a new toy at Christmas and forgets the old toys. But the old toys still have value too, and the old toys are still part of your repertory. Yes. But you got to learn the new one first. You got to be fascinated with it. So you think about what allows us to even have these kinds of conversations is the development of the scientific method, which is a product of modern rational consciousness. But scientific method, many people in quote science end quote interpreted that to mean if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so there was a throwing out of the baby with the bathwater, not among everybody, but among sufficient enough people that most people in the culture today think science is some kind of master authority over everything, when it's not. It's got something to say about the things in its area of expertise, but it is the other way to look at this. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, is to say if you can't measure it, someone else has an expertise in it, not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we let the poets, we let the theologians, we let the philosophers have that domain. I don't want a philosopher designing a rocket to get me to the moon, but I don't want a scientist telling me what love is.
There you go. I like the way you put that. And the science is actually coming to the point where it's proving ancient teaching.
Well, that's the breakthrough period that we're in. That I would assert accountability and its brother and sister disciplines is seeking to find a way to integrate the brain and the emotion, the mind and the body, to see it. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier about words and emotions being single units, to see the integration of all this, and not just to see it intellectually, but to feel it, to feel the truth of it, to learn to harness our minds. Because our minds have, like you said, our minds helped us get through crazy stuff. But the problem is the mind could get on a one-way track without some kind of intervention to offer it something else, and it just reproduced it over and over and over again, year after year after year. Belief systems are mental constructs. They're not emotional constructs, although they're related.
Yes.
And they're related to that question that you asked. Do you ever find yourself wanting, what's the first one?
Have you ever heard somebody you loved, regretted it, and then did it again, usually in the same way?
Right. And how many times have I found myself in a similar situation and my mind is telling me, don't do it, and I do it anyway. So my mind and emotions are not working together.
Correct.
In that reality.
Right.
And then I'll turn around and use that to blame myself for being unable to get my mind and emotions to work together, and just perpetuate the cycle.
Yeah. You'll judge it as some kind of weakness or something wrong with you, or something wrong with them, or I wouldn't have done it that way.
Right.
They're all crazy.
Yeah, so my tendency always was to blame the other guy and then secretly blame myself.
Yeah.
Secretly.
Yeah.
Can't let you know that.
Hell no. Yeah.
Suffering in silence.
No.
Well, this is what happens, John, when we open the podcast asking what is it we want to talk about. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. We'll see how this is received.
Well, it's always useful to me. I think this demystifying work is ongoing, like you said at the beginning. Even if we say the same thing that we said last week, we're going to say it slightly differently. We're going to have a slightly different understanding. We may have worked on this with other people in the intervening time, gotten insights from them. Life is an amazing kaleidoscope.
Repetition, as far as breaking through this morass of misinformation and trauma, is effective.
Yes, because all I want to do is love and be loved.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lifetime avoiding it.
Yeah.
The human condition.
The human condition. Cool.
Well, I love you, John.
Love you too.
I'm grateful for everything that you've taught me and inspired me to learn myself.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
So have a great weekend.
I will.
And we'll do this again.
Yes. Next week at 2 o'clock.